How important is artillery? Well, to the soldiers that fought for the United States Army out here in Malvern Hill, they'd probably tell you that artillery is pretty darn important. To the Confederates that fought out here and fell in these fields, they know just how important it is. We're out here to share the story of Adelbert Ames.
Adelbert Ames was born on October 31st, 1835 in Rockland, Maine, the younger son of Jesse and Martha Bradbury Ames. His father was a sea captain and owned the Ames Mill in Northfield, Minnesota. Ames was educated in local schools and followed his father to sea as a young man. In 1856, he received an appointment to the United States Military Academy, graduating in 1861, just 2 months after the Civil War began. Commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 2nd U.S. Artillery on May 6, 1861, Ames was promoted to first lieutenant within a week and reassigned to the 5th U.S. Artillery. He was severely wounded in the right thigh during the First Battle of Bull Run on July 21, 1861, but refused to leave his position. For this bravery, he received the Congressional Medal of Honor 32 years later.
Out here in Malvern Hill today, at one of the locations where the battle took place, across this open ground. And out here, a man by the name of Adelbert Ames, or Adelbert Ames, depending on how you pronounce it, was on that ridge line just behind me there with Company A. And he had himself 6 12-pounder guns out here firing into the face of the enemy. At the time that he was fighting out here on July 1st of 1862, he was a lieutenant. By the time the war was over with, Mr. Ames would be a general. And in 1933, Mr. Ames would be the last general from the American Civil War to die. If you watched a previous video where we talked about another famous artilleryman, Mr. Pelham, he was a really good friend of Mr. Pelham's. The fight out here was a lot like the fight that took place at another famous stop called Gettysburg, especially with the artillery duel that was going back and forth and the men charging from one location to another. But it's kind of hard to imagine the loud guns and everything that would have gone off out here at this location, simply because today it's just a peaceful countryside and it's literally on some backcountry roads. It's in the middle of nowhere. Beautiful, beautiful cornfields as far as the eyes can see. Beautiful trees with the landscape being painted orange and red from the changing of the trees for fall. But on July 1st, 1862, this field was a field of fire and death and destruction. And there was no escaping that destruction out here at the Battle of Malvern Hill.
After returning to duty in the spring of 1862, Ames briefly served in the defenses of Washington, D.C., and participated in key battles during the Peninsula Campaign, including the Siege of Yorktown and the battles of Gaines' Mill and Malvern Hill, the latter earning him a brevet promotion to lieutenant colonel. Ames returned to Maine to seek a regimental command and was appointed colonel of the 20th Maine Infantry Regiment on August 20th, 1862. He led his regiment through the Maryland, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville campaigns. On April 27, 1863, Major General George G. Meade appointed him aide-de-camp, and on May 20th, he was promoted to Brigadier General of Volunteers.
Now, all along this ridge line here, leading back in that direction there, that's where 29 guns from the Union artillery would have been placed. And it also stretches out back towards the wooded area here, from over in this direction, leading around this direction here. We're talking about heavy, heavy pieces of artillery out here, one company after another, firing in this direction where I'm standing now, because the Confederates are coming up to at least this point for sure. They never quite made it to the guns over there on that ridge. But the deadliest thing that was being fired out here was the canister shot. As soon as they would put that in there, that canister shot comes out with hot lead balls. And that, or hot iron balls that are coming out of the end of the cannons. That hot iron shot that's coming out is spreading like rapid grape shot, rapid fire. It's almost as if a whole line of infantrymen has let loose, and these large pieces of metal are essentially flinging out of the end of this at a very rapid speed. And the Confederate lines, as they're approaching from this direction over here, I mean, they're just melting. And often that wooded line there is where the Confederates would be coming from, at least a portion of them, as they were marching up in this direction. But by the time they got over here, the lines were chaos. They were disorganized. They were falling apart. Men were laying on the field wounded. Some of them already dead. We talked not too long ago out here about a Confederate soldier that lay out here dead as his brother trampled right over the spot, not realizing that his own brother had been hit by one of those canister shots out here and had ripped a hole right through his chest. That's the kind of carnage and destruction we're talking about. So right around 1:30 in the fields behind me here, the Confederate artillery opened up after a signal, and they started firing in this general direction, and they let loose with everything that they have. The Union gunners that are on the fields in front of me here also replied to the fire, and they let open a lively fire, hitting with precision, striking caissons behind me, and Confederate artillery pieces, along with infantrymen that are hiding in those woods back there. From the very beginning, this fight is doomed. Adelbert Ames, like I said, is up here on this hill with his 6 guns in Company A. And he is preparing for the worst. Now, he's not an idiot by any stretch of the imagination. He's a very well-trained soldier. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's a good officer, too. Eventually, he goes on to earn the Medal of Honor. He gets a promotion by the end of the war to general as well. Adelbert Ames is firing his guns over here as rapidly as he can. Now, some of the descriptions that take place out here, some of the things that people talk about, entire lines of men falling flat on their face because of the firing from these cannons out here. We're talking about uprooted ground from the cannon and the canister shot that comes across this field and lands out here on these fields. We're talking about entire batteries falling apart, almost melting away because of the firing that's coming in on them. The vast field of fire that happens out here at Malvern Hill is so explosive that it can only be compared to some of the fighting that happens at Gettysburg. The artillery duel at Gettysburg, for example. And even just a few days prior to this, you look at the Battle of Gaines' Mill, for example. The largest frontal assault that ever took place in the American Civil War takes place at the Battle of Gaines' Mill. We're talking about the very beginning stages of the American Civil War, just as General Lee gets involved. This is how it's going to turn out here in 1862. But why we're here is to talk about that field behind me there. This is the field of Mr. Ames. Him and his artillery out here are the reason why Malvern Hill is such a success for the Union Army. Up until that point, the Union Army never quite got up and concentrated at any one spot during those 7 days, really. They're concentrated here. And there was even a Confederate officer that told Robert E. Lee, if the Union Army and McClellan are concentrated, we ought to leave him alone. Leave him alone they did not. And Lee was pretty aggressive. Adelbert Ames answered in reply with his guns out here on this field. The Union artillery of that company ends up firing some 1,392 shots from their battery in reply. And that's an amazing amount of firepower for any one unit.
As the Gettysburg campaign began, Ames passed command of the 20th Maine to Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. He took command of the 2nd Brigade, 1st Division, 11th Corps in the Army of the Potomac. Although not as widely recognized as Chamberlain during the Battle of Gettysburg, Ames took over his division after Brigadier General Francis Barlow was wounded and captured. He engaged in fierce fighting to repel Major General Jubal Early's attack on East Cemetery Hill, earning the respect of his men, who presented him with their battle flag. After Gettysburg, Ames reverted to brigade command and received a brevet promotion to colonel in the regular army.
Imagine being a soldier out here on these fields in that artillery unit, positioned on that small rise right there behind me. Just being a plain old regular everyday average guy from some small town in a northern city somewhere. And let's not forget that in some of those artillery units, they're not just northerners too. There are some southern men that fought for the United States Army at that time and kept loyal to their oath to the United States Army. But just imagine being one of those guys here at Malvern Hill. I mean, you've already been running from one location to another. The guns are heavy. You've had to limber them up. You've had to position them, place them, fire them all day long, pick them back up, stick them back into a position to be carried, drag them along, go to another place, do the same thing all over again. And not to mention, you're running ragged. They call this the 7 days battles for a reason. We're talking fight after fight from one location to the next, and it was intense. It did not let up for a long time. And then finally, the Union Army, instead of staying strong here at this hill and continuing to fight their enemy, they pack up and they go down the river. They truck away from here. Imagine the morale of the soldiers after this fight, thinking that they have created something grand here at Malvern Hill. Just to retreat, just to head down the river here to Harrison's Landing. The morale has got to be at an all-time low. And the fear that you must feel when you're standing in these positions as the cannon shots flying over your head, because the Confederate artillery is trying to hone in on your position, and they haven't quite hit it yet. When the next one comes in, is it going to be on target? You won't know until it happens, and when it does, the caisson goes flying, the explosions happen all around you, men's arms and legs come flying off. There's death and destruction everywhere, and screaming. This is not a peaceful field. Not if you look at it the right way. Well, there you have it. We've got the story of Adelbert Ames, where he came from, how he ends up getting here, and his success here at Malvern Hill. But his story continues on throughout the American Civil War, and I'm sure that eventually we're going to get around to telling more of it. Until next time, this is History of Waffles.
In 1867, following the Reconstruction Acts, he was appointed commander of the 4th Military District, overseeing Mississippi and Arkansas. On June 15, 1868, President Andrew Johnson named him provisional governor of Mississippi, a role he held until February 1870, when the state was readmitted to the Union. He was later appointed to the U.S. Senate by the Republican-controlled legislature. In 1873, Ames was elected governor of Mississippi, serving from 1874 to 1876. He advocated for the rights of African Americans while facing opposition from white detractors. Following the return of Southern Democrats to power in 1876, Ames resigned on March 29th to avoid impeachment. The Democrat Party was now the iron rule of the South and suppressing newly freed enslaved people, while creating laws that would damage the South and take more than 100 years to recover from.